The frequencies with which we reform the institutions has increased. Even if you ignore politics, politics does not ignore you. You better participate in the political system. The Constitution is an interesting thing because it's a document that is supposed to keep us all together. We also expect government to be responding to our needs, to our demands. I am a strong party believer. Debating politics in society will be phenomenally important.
Welcome to the Astana Times Unplugged podcast series where we break down complicated things into simpler terms. Today we will discuss a political development that is unfolding here in Kazakhstan, constitutional reform.
And Kazakhstan is in the process of rewriting its constitution, around 84% of its basic document, which raises important questions not only about the legal text, but about how institutions function, how power is exercised, and how citizens experience governance in daily life.
To help us unpack what this really means in practice, we're joined by Dr. Ricardo Pelizzo, who's also an internationally recognized specialist in political development, institutional reform, and governance performance. Ricardo, thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
And I would like to start with a question that we gathered here to discuss, and the rewriting of the Constitution. And I know that you worked extensively on constitutional reforms and institutional performance across different regions from Central Asia to Africa and the Asia Pacific. And I want to put Kazakhstan in a comparative context. And since we are talking about the draft constitution, the rewriting of the basic document, how unusual is that globally? And maybe if you could tell us what that signals politically.
This is a very interesting question. I mean, I think that historically, institutional reforms and constitutional reforms were very rare. You know, when I was doing my PhD some 30 years ago, you know, we had very, very rare electoral reforms because most countries will adopt an electoral system and will use it for many, many years. And, you know, for example, in the Italian case, I'm Italian by birth. You know, the Italian electoral system that we used starting in 1948 is what we used until 1992. So 44 years uninterrupted without basically any change. And then since 1992, starting with electoral reforms that we conducted in 1993, we have changed the electoral system 5 times, and we are about to change it again. So, you know, this is not just an Italian, a European, a global, but it's a truly global phenomenon. The frequencies with which we reform the institutions has increased. That's true for institutions such as electoral systems and electoral laws. That's also true with the constitutional amendments.
And if we speak about the constitution, when you just said that it happens rarely, and when does it make sense to rewrite the basic document of a particular country?
Well, I mean, the Constitution is an interesting thing because it's a document that is supposed to keep us all together.
Right.
It constitutes us. You know, we are from different people, men, women, old, young. This is the document that gives us some meaning to be together. And we need, and among other things, it needs to make sure that the government actually works for the people. And I think that one of the key points of this reform is to make the government a little bit more efficient than it has been in years past, and to take decision in a way that is more swift, effective, and to increase the government's trust or citizens' trust in the government institutions.
And I just wanted to pause on Kazakhstan now.
Yes.
And since we are talking about constitutional reform, and Kazakhstan is set to transition to a unicameral parliament, which is to be decided by national referendum just very, very soon. And I wanted to ask you, in practical terms, Kazakhstan wants to make its legislative power stronger. But what does that mean in practical terms?
Well, I mean, you know, this is a very complicated issue in the sense that in addition to discussing whether we're going to have one chamber or two, We need to look at the kind of parliamentary committee system we're going to have inside the parliament. We will need to look at the procedures for the functioning of parliament, which power will be given to committee chairs, to the speakers, and so forth and so on. So it's not just that we reform a parliament or a legislature from a bicameral structure to a unicameral one that is sufficient to all of a sudden make the parliament more efficient. Obviously, as I think I said in other occasions, when you reduce the number of chambers to 2 to 1, you speed up the lawmaking process because you don't need both chambers to go through the propose amendments and so forth and so on. But it's very, very important that in addition to macro level reforms, we go from 2 chambers to 1, actually to look at the meso level, which is what kind of powers will be given to the parliament. Those will be spelled out, I think, or should be spelled out in the new parliamentary rules, if and when they're going to be redrafted. So we need to see that to understand where and to what extent the parliament is going to be empowered.
I have a question about, Assel asked you before, what does it signal politically for Kazakhstan specifically? Because I think when we look at the Central Asia, for example, what do we signal to our neighbors and what do we signal to our foreign partners with this particular reform?
Well, Kazakhstan, it's certainly the most advanced country in the region. It's the richest, the most powerful. I think it wants to represent a model of governance, and I think one of the things that is absolutely true is that government's action will always respond and adjust to technological changes. The way in which information now travels is much faster than ever before. Back in my day when I was younger, you could use the phone or you had to write a letter. Then we discovered the email. We started communicating with friends around the world, in real time. Actually, now we have Zoom, Skype, or whatever other instruments. We can talk very quickly, and so people have lost the sense of the fact that to pass a law or to govern or to prepare a policy actually is a time-consuming exercise, not something you can do instantly. But because of our technology, communication technology more specifically, have accelerated the pace at which we live, we also expect government to be responding to our needs, to our demands with the same kind of speed. And my impression is that the government, in passing this specifically, the reform of the parliament, wants to address precisely that.
Even the greatest constitutional changes can fail in practice. Even the constitution itself that is not touched by any changes can fail in practice. In your experience, what usually determines whether reform actually works after the text is adopted, and where do you think reforms usually stuck in practical life?
Okay, I don't want to do propaganda to my own books, though I hope that I'm sure that someone will buy my books. What I always said is that the process of reform making always begins with a crisis, real or perceived, and the government has to give a signal to the population that is taking the crisis seriously. So if the government believes that the lawmaking process, the policy-making process is a little bit too slow and not adequate to address in a timely fashion the demands of the population, introduces some reforms, as in this case. Now, if the population is satisfied by what I call cosmetic reforms, they change the structure of parliament from 2 chambers to 1, and we're happy with that. We don't need to do anything else. The population will not have demands to actually proper implementation. On the other hand, if the population continues to have a strong demand for better governance or more effective reforms or more effective and efficient and speedy decision making, the population will compel reformers not only to pass cosmetic reforms but to implement them properly and to make them effective reforms. And so I think it's in a way an interaction between the government and the people. If the people don't care, I don't think any government will go out of its way to do things by itself. The government has to adjust to the people because every government understands that it will stay in power only for as long as the population is happy with the way the government works. We're not always very happy. Sometimes we are more happy, sometimes we are a little bit more unhappy, but on and all, there's a sense that the government is doing more or less the right thing. We're happy with that. and the government, therefore, has to preserve that confidence or that level of trust and appreciation in the population. Hence, the reforms that we are discussing, I guess.
And that actually comes to a very important topic that we discussed on another occasion with you, right? The public trust and the political engagement of people. There is a paradox that we see not only in Kazakhstan, but in other countries, in transition, reforming countries. Citizens often distrust all initiatives that come from the government. At the same time, we can see how many people remain disengaged from policy making, from even just caring about what happens not on a national level, but let's say on a regional level, in your town hall, in your city hall. From your perspective, where can we draw this, delicate line between institutional responsibility and our own responsibility as citizens?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that even if you ignore politics, politics does not ignore you, and so you better participate in the political system. You give your contribution, you participate in the elections, you become politically active, because by doing so you will make sure that your voice is recorded, is heard, it will be taken into consideration to tailor whatever policy the government and parliament are working on. The problem is that I think that precisely because people are not very interested and they don't participate and they don't trust. So I think it's a vicious circle.
Right.
I don't trust because I don't participate, and therefore I don't even bother to understand the process through which a policy is conceived, designed, adopted, and implemented, and eventually evaluated. And at the same time, precisely because I was not involved, I don't trust, and I don't trust because I don't do it. So it gets worse, and I think at some point it will be very important for policymakers, reformers, the government to tell the population, we really value your input. Please give us your input. That will help us to come up with better policies.
You know what I'm afraid of, that in the case of the countries of this region in particular, because many countries are only over 30 years old, developing in this particular realities, geopolitical, economical, what the world is experiencing, and etc. I feel like sometimes there is a problem that people participated, but then they felt like their trust was not necessarily abused, but not taken into account as respectively as they would like it to be. But then again, it's a very infantile position to say, once they didn't trust me, or they didn't take into account my opinion, I'm going to give up. It's another infantile position. There should be institutions, policies, governments, service people. They need to move towards people. Citizens should move towards their political institutions and the country in general. So there will be any consensus. But in what I'm trying to ask you, do you think it will be solved only by people just participating, or there should be some psychological shift happening in our minds, in both political class and citizens?
I mean, I think it's two sides of the same story. I think that the people should be a little bit more interested in the political process. I mean, when you have elections, you ask the population, a little bit more than half of the population, or a little bit more than half of the voters actually go and bother to vote. That's depressing, because it means you don't really. In the end, you don't really care. And so if you don't care to make your voice heard at the elections, for whatever reason, I think that to some extent undermines your credibility as a professional complainer, because you didn't bother to let people know what you actually want. You didn't bother to contact candidates, to contact electoral campaigns teams, to let them know, in my region, in my city, in my village, this is what we need. So that's a problem. I also think that on the other side, political parties, politicians, candidates should go back to engage people much more than have done in recent years, in the sense that one of the beauties of the kind of communication that we do now without through WhatsApp, TikTok, social media, whatever, is that we can reach a lot of people in a very, very short time frame. But the personal dimension, which is the one that through which we actually build trust in one another, is completely lost. You need to put your face, you need to go to the people, you need to go and ask them, what is really a real issue that I, in case I'm elected, should try to address. I think this is very important. So I think that both political elites, candidates, parties on the one hand, and the citizens and the voters, should take a half a step towards each other and find a way to get to know each other better, because that's the only way in which you build trust.
Exactly. It's a two-way work. It's a two-way street where we meet each other at some point of time. And if we speak about political engagement, what I was also thinking, and looking back to the courses I've taken in my university years, political engagement, why people are increasingly reluctant to engage politically, because in many countries in our region, they think that engaging somehow civically brings some repercussions.
I think that what you're describing is not just a peculiarity of your country, Central Asia.
Right.
I think it's something that is happening globally. I mean, by pure accident this morning, I published a little article on the future Italian referendum on how to change the Italian electoral system, and some of readers wrote to me right away saying, well, why political elites in Italy always talk about electoral reforms, but they never talk about reforming political parties? And I thought, oh, that's an interesting question. The problem is the political parties in Western Europe, where we had a party organization which individually had millions of voters. Okay, so back in the day, 20-30% of the population of Italy, France, Germany was a party member. All the members of the trade unions in the United Kingdom were ex officio members of the Labour Party. So, this party were organization with literally millions of voters. These millions of voters do not exist anymore. Italian citizens or French citizens or German citizens that up to the beginning of the 90s, so 91, 92, were willing to join a party, pay the fee, attend meetings, discuss political issues, and be politically active, has become completely uninterested in the political process. And that's a tragedy, because, then you have these my poor governments of Western Europe that try their best to tackle complex issues that have to do with climate change, energy transition, a demographic profile that is not too rosy and will be even worse in the future. And they need to make ends meet and make very difficult choices, so forth and so on, because the job of a policymaker is complex. It's not that it's a difficult job, and the people are, in spite of all of this, don't want to get informed. They don't want to get involved. Don't want to give the political class the benefit of the doubt. But they take this simplistic, sometimes populist position that go very well in hand with the absence of trust. And so I think it's a problem that I think it's global and has to do with the fact that I don't know if it is probably, I always wonder to what extent is the consequence of the end of the Cold War. And until the Soviet Union existed, the world in a way was easier, in the sense that, we had the Western Bloc, we had the Soviet Bloc, and our parties had very strong ideological profiles. So, if you're a communist, you're a communist, you're a fascist, you're a fascist, you're a Christian Democrat or a liberal or a conservative. We knew what you stood for, what were your guiding principle, your philosophy. I think that once that world order came to an end, even the party identity became a little bit more difficult to understand or to recognize. And I think that by watering down their identity, voters lost interest in those parties, and therefore came to the typical populist reaction, which is the parties are all the same. Partially true, by the way, but once you come to the conclusion that the parties are all the same and they're all bad, that they don't care about me, why should I vote in the election? you don't even bother to look at the policies because you say, of course, since these people that don't care about me made this policy, clearly this policy cannot possibly be any good.
And when that referendum is going to take place, you mentioned the electoral system.
It has been postponed
because I think that they invited more discussion so people will understand what's going on, I think, right? It's not like in Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, everything is quick. Everybody's getting everything right away. They don't need a lot of explanation. Citizens, political parties. But I want to come back to what you said about a new class of politicians to be more engaged themselves personally in terms of like telling more about themselves to the citizens, to make sure that people know them personally via social media, etc. And what I liked what you said about the parties, because I feel like in Kazakhstan we missed that point where
what do you mean?
Where you know which party stands for for different things. Like in the US, you know that conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, you know the rules of the game, even though you're like you can be just like me. When I was in the US, I was like 20 years old, 19, no interest, no understanding of politics, but I knew right away Democrats are standing for this, Republicans are for this. In Kazakhstan, it's harder for people, and I feel like since this kind of model maybe became outdated, if we look at the Western Europe, for example, maybe in Kazakhstan there should be more. It's just my thought. I'm going to share it with you guys. You can say it sounds not very smart, but maybe there should be more politicians that are kind of self-centered. I'm Aida Haidar. I'm going to become your deputy. I'm going to become, I don't know, the mayor of the city. And I represent this as a person. Not necessarily be tied to a political party, but like represent some values that will be close to the citizens and they will go and vote for you. What do you mean? What do you think? Is it changing in this way that we will have more, political personalities, I guess? Or parties, we need to have parties, political parties.
I am a strong party believer. I mean, for me, you can change your constitution, you can change your parliament, you can change everything. If you don't have proper party organizations, your political system is not going to work. I think that one of the key problems we have in the West, United States and Europe as well, is that we had countries that were democratic, they had democratic constitution, but had past parties that were bringing the people into the political system and in the political process. Once our parties became weaker and therefore unable to perform these functions as effectively as they had done before, our democratic systems, our forms of government started working a little bit less well. So I always say, you want to save European democracies, you don't need less parties, you need more parties. Whatever debate there was in the early 90s about creating these fictional, mythical, mythological, fluid party, light parties, slim organization, that was absolute rubbish. It was completely a nonsensical idea because we were basically trying to neglect entirely some of the key lessons in political science. If you go back to the 1950s, the early 1950s to 1951, when Duverger published his book, The Political Parties, the Parti Politique in French, Duverger said, if you know political parties, you don't know anything about constitutions, you get a very good understanding of our political systems. But if you know everything about constitutions and ignore political parties, you will never understand how our political system actually works. Because the party was the cornerstone. The party was the one that was connecting the society to the political elites. It was providing input on the way up, telling the political elites, these are the demands of the population. He was connecting the elites to the population in a second way by explaining to the population why the government was doing the choices that it was making. They had a function also, I think more importantly and generally neglected, to educate the voters. because uneducated voter starts thinking a little bit more in a way that is a little bit more sophisticated and less simplistic about policy issues. And that's why even in those days, people that were not terribly educated in other respects, who didn't have university degrees, had a rather sophisticated of understanding of the political process and of politics, which we 30 years later, in spite of sometimes of some of our fancy degrees, are not able to do. And so I think that was a key problem. So I think parties are very, very important. I will never, I will not even under torture, I will ever say, no, we need leaders. And actually, if I may say so, I don't want to point the fingers against any country specifically, but some of the governance issues that we can detect around the world, including in the West, is because the party as organization have been emptied from the inside, and they've been replaced by these personalistic movements that are focused on these so-called leaders who have sometimes
you're talking about Donald
good
Trump.
ideas and sometimes have ideas that are not terribly good. And so I think, what is our best line of defense against crazy ideas? Well, that's a political party. The final point I want to make about political parties is that it educates people. But first of all, because it makes people understand, and its voters and its party members understand how politics works, which is very important. But also is a place for aggregating preferences.
What kind of?
Well, preferences of the voters, because you want lower taxes and lower welfare. She wants more taxes and more welfare. And therefore, you political party, to win the election, you need to get one vote. You need to get the second vote, and therefore, if I do what you want, if I party do what you want, I will lose their vote, and vice versa. And so I need to find policy solutions that at some level, in some way, will resonate with both of you, so that I can maximize my electoral returns, and by bringing the people in and making them understand that good policy making in the end is about finding compromise solution that will work best for the majority or for the total population. That's the key secret, and we don't have that anymore, and we desperately need it, at least in my part of the world.
So political parties are no longer serving, as you mentioned, as these channels between political elites and citizens.
Much less so, because the way it used to work before is that if you're a political party in a country with 30 million people and you have 5 million members, each of which has a wife or a husband and children and family members, and so forth and so on, you explain to the party member that the reason why the government is doing this is because of blah, 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 whatever the explanation is. And this person goes back into his family, back to his friends, back to the neighbors, and starts talking politics. And he will explain to all these people what's actually going on. That's something of crucial importance. I don't want to tell anybody how to run Kazakhstan, because I know there's a lot of talented people here that have a lot of very good ideas, but having political clubs debating politics in society will be phenomenally important. You don't have that. Even people who sometimes claim to be interested are not following politics, and I think it's very, very important. So I think that's what I miss of the good old days.
You said we lost this when political parties tried to win Assel's vote and my vote. What do you think needs to happen, for example, in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, and you've been living here for quite a while, for this to happen? What is missing?
You need to invest on your party organizations. You need to invest in a political class. I understand that there's a sense in the country, here in Kazakhstan, that governors, regional hakims will play a more managerial role. That's wonderful, but, we also need people that, in addition to being very good managers, and I understand the importance of managing well, because I teach good governance, so I understand it. I cannot say better than most, but I understand it. But we understand the importance of politics, and I think that's something that needs to be cultivated. I think you need to develop probably younger generations get them involved, get them interested, give them training. They need to acquire knowledge, not only also from professors, obviously. So, I mean, what we teach is important, but we cannot expect one university professor, especially those of us who have not lived in active party politics or in politics, to be able to provide the kind of practical knowledge that someone who has political ambitions will need to have to succeed in politics. And that you can only learn by actually getting involved, getting engaged, participating, being groomed, and little by little you develop into this wonderful political animal, and I use this as a compliment, that could actually do a very positive contribution to the country. So I think, so if it were up to me, that's what I would encourage.
And one point that I wanted to jump in on the political parties is that I think that political parties are becoming increasingly not attractive to the population in general, because there is a common opinion about that the party is just a group of people who have connections and who are just serving their own interests. So those days are gone when, these parties were gathered to make some good, to make difference for people. And because there is a general distrust in government and politics in general, I think less and less people are going to join the parties, and most importantly, the brightest talents, the brightest minds won't join the parties. And then comes up the question, who will be ruling the country if the brightest mind just...
I think last time we met, or even before when I met Aida, I was telling her, we can sit down and draft the best constitution in the world. We can design the best institutions in the world. But in the end, if the people that we put inside the machine to operate this institution is unqualified personnel, we are not going to get a good result. A smart, caring, altruistic, ethical political leader will work even if this institutional design is not perfect. On the other hand, a perfectly designed institution with less than ideal personnel will not produce the same results. So I totally think that it's absolutely crucial to actually create a political class in any country, to make sure that even when individual will be selected from this class to take some government responsibility, they will do something good for the country. I mean, it's terrible for me to see some people that were former football players or stage actors. I mean, wonderful people, very talented in their own respective areas of expertise. Very popular because obviously if you're a super actor or a singer, soccer player, you're super famous and also rich. Or too rich. But the point is, you don't have the background. You don't have the preparation. You don't have the skills. And therefore to put you in charge of running a political system, a city, a region, a country, I think it's
You have to know the system, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you will not go down the street and say someone, okay, there's a hospital, go there and be a surgeon. You will never do that because you expect your surgeon to go to medical school, do the residency in the hospital, and be well trained and experienced before you give them the responsibility to perform surgery. And so I always find it amazing that we think that for something as important as running a country, which is the biggest company in your country, everybody's life depends on the government. The idea that we can actually get people who are not prepared to perform that role, that task, whatever, and they can be empowered, that's, I think, a recipe for disaster. And I think that even in the West, where these ideas, unfortunately, have taken root or gained currency and have become more popular, we see the results.
I think it comes back to the what we've discussed before we decided to meet for a podcast about the public literacy of citizens, because people who understand what's going on, who are trying to grasp at least what's going on, they will know when the political party is becoming too personalized and the politician is becoming the center of this political party and doing crazy stuff and nobody's calling out him on it. I think that's also plays a role in terms of creating a space where not a musician or a rock star will become a president. I mean,
I agree, and there's also, it's not that I'm obsessed personally with the media, but the media play a key role because,
exactly.
if you look at the way in which my generation in Europe was using or collecting information or accessing information was predominantly through official media. We will read daily papers, we will watch the TV, right now younger generations and unfortunately even those who are no longer that young no longer rely as much as they did on traditional media, but they seek information, news on a variety of social media where the information that is shared is not always 100% reliable. And worse, we know from empirical research that has been done that people self-select with like-minded individual, which actually contributes to the growing polarization, alienation of segments of the electorate, because they start believing their own fictional, conspiratorial beliefs.
because it's easier to believe in the conspiracy theory because it's very simple rather than talking from a conspiracy theorist. I know what it means.
Could you just tell us, as to someone be outside the politics, what are some of the key pillars that entail the term good governance? And does that include what we just discussed about qualified personnel and those caring people that know how the system works?
Well, certainly the qualified people comes into the picture because, we always talk about the importance of political leadership. Leadership is people. So,
Exactly,
so you can't have a well-functioning system of government or governance without good people. I mean, obviously, we also understand that no two people are alike. And so the point is, we don't want to have a system that whenever there's a change in political personnel, experiences massive fluctuations, major swings. How do we minimize that risk with proper institutions? Now, good governance is good because it uses power, authority, and institution to promote the well-being of the population. And so, the way we look into it is that, for example, the World Bank with Daniel Kaufman in the late 90s, they said, well, for us, good governance is that thing that includes political stability and absence of violence, the ability to control corruption, to give voice to the people, to express what they want, and accountability, so the government makes a decision and respond to the people for its action. It's government that has to be effective, because a government that has great ideas that are not translated into practice is not terribly useful. It has to produce high quality legislation and good regulations, and there's gotta be an element of rule of law.
Right.
And so if you have these elements, it is believed that if you are performing well in each of these areas, you have the condition that allow that system of government to produce results that are beneficial for the population.
Is there any example of a country that is quite close to that ideal of good governance? Because you just listed a lot of elements, and I think it would be very hard for, let's say, for political leadership to make sure they are all in one picture.
Well, I mean, there are several countries. I mean, no country is perfect, first of all.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and no country is a complete disaster either. So we are more or less good in some areas than in others.
Yeah.
There are several examples of countries that are always near the top of these rankings. Norway, Finland, Singapore, New Zealand are well-known. Denmark are well-known cases of countries in which the quality of government is really, really high. There are also some countries, predominantly in the developing world, where governance is not terribly high. Countries like Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then the vast majority of countries, which is somewhere in between, doing a little bit better in one respect, a little bit worse in another respect.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree that no country is ideal, no country is perfect, as no human is perfect.
No.
We know that we are not ideal, but there is something we want to strive to, at least know that there is something.
Yeah. I mean, but it's funny because I don't think people read it anymore. But in the early 70s, probably 1971, Dahl published a book called Polyarchy. And so why do you write this book? Because he said democracy is a beautiful idea, but it's an abstract concept. Nobody will be perfectly democratic. But polyarchy is a system that is pluralistic, competitive, whatever, and can be seen as an approximation to that ideal. And I think, with good governance is exactly the same. It's an ideal that cannot possibly be fulfilled anywhere. Also because, our societies are constantly changing. Our needs are constantly changing. The context in which we operate are constantly changing, and therefore a solution that were quote unquote ideal 5, 10, 20, 30, 60 years ago may no longer be any good today. So so there's got to be an element of self-correction on an ongoing basis, so to speak.
It just reminds me of my university years and those courses that I've been taking where we were discussing democracy, democratic development, and it's actually a very abstract concept. And we were talking with my team classmates that who said that we should strive towards democracy? Who said that, let's say, we were talking back then about America, but who said that's what we should strive?
That's the staple.
Who said that we were talking about our country in particular? It was 10 years ago.
Even the concept of democracy is a very complicated, complex, and in many ways contradictory, because, in 1996, 1997, Richard Katz was my advisor back then, published a book called Democracy and Election. And the first part of the book is about the different stream of democratic theorizing, and he said, well, of course, there are the liberal theories of democracies. Is about representation. I vote for a party or for a politician. He takes decision on my behalf, and so on and so on. So that's one stream of democratic theory. There's a second stream of democratic theory that he called participationist. The participationist notion of democracy is I want to be involved in the policy making and decision making, even if at the end the outcome, the policy that is adopted, has nothing to do with what was my initial preference. But I want to be consultant, be part of the process. And then there are also communitarian doctrines of democracy for which actually representative democracy or an election are not only they're absolutely pointless and useless. And so the thing is, when we speak about democracy, should we be democratic or not? Which of democracy are we talking about?
Exactly.
I mean, I think it's we need to be a little bit more precise.
That's a very rhetoric question, I guess, just in general about democracy and stuff like that. And you mentioned the participation, and I think that's the thing that I'm trying to tell these days to my friends concerning our upcoming referendum. When people say they are not going to go, I just tell them go. Just say just take the point no, and make your voice heard. Even if you disagree, you should agree or disagree, whatever your perspective on that issue, you should go and vote. That's very important.
I think Kazakhstan is actually practicing democracy like every 2 years with referendums, with different elections and etc. And I think like a lot of people, when they say I'm not going to go vote, I feel like they're thinking that if they will go vote, they should vote positively. Like for nuclear power station, for the constitutional reform, as if they don't have a choice to say no. I think that's the reason. Like, I would like to see more people go voting just as a journalist to see what the results will be, because when you have people who are rallied by the government, rallied by, I don't know, if they're part of political party, to go and vote for constitutional reform. And there is some percentage of people who are not going to vote for the constitutional reform. I would like to see the results. I'm just curious. Yeah. But the problem is that many people who think that they need to say yes when they want to say no, they don't go and participate. We don't get the whole picture.
Well, I mean, if you I mean, not to be pedantic and boring, but but I will. In the 1960s, where people start talking about democracy, the world is becoming more democratic. Which democracy is best? How do we know? And they started coming up with measures, and some of these efforts were measuring the quality of democracy, in my opinion, incorrectly, on the basis of participation, because it was understood that a political system in which people participate, it's better than a system in which it does not participate. You get a better sense of what the people want. Whatever the outcome is going to be more legitimate. Because the problem of when you have an elections, you think about the United States. In the midterm elections, you have the representatives in the House that go for re-election, and the electoral turnout is about 30%.
That's low.
So basically one voter out of 3 goes to vote and the other 2 don't. And then you win a seat winning 50%. 50% of 30%, which means that you realistically represent 15% of the electorate in your district, and the other 85% doesn't want you. So that's a huge problem. So it's much better to have higher rates of participation, because in case you win or whatever happens, you can say, well, actually, I am the representative of a majority of the people. Yes, this position was endorsed by a large number of people, and so it's very important. And I think that not participating is not good.
I think it also comes to the point about the institutional performance and the health of institutions in general, because people don't go for the reason that sometimes they don't believe the vote they make would be taken into account. If they believe, let's say, that the system is transparent and accountable, maybe they would go and vote at least, and would be happy with whatever result comes up, because they knew that the system was transparent.
And I think it's important for the government to see the picture, to understand what's going on. I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing. And for people, when I say to anyone I meet and I ask them about whether they're going to go and vote, I mean, I will have to go and vote because I'm a journalist. I mean, I may be lazy, I don't want to, but I'm going to go and do it. But when I tell them that they need to go, they don't have to think about all this bigger stuff, like whether it's going to be counted or not, whether it's going to be a fair election or referendum or not. Just do your part. Let's try and see for once, without thinking about bigger stuff that we cannot control, just do what we can on our side of the story.
Yeah, but this goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. People who don't vote are less likely to trust the system, and precisely because they don't trust the system, they don't vote. So you have this vicious circle that is self-reinforcing, and it's not good. In the end, you need to find a way to snap out of it, or to break it down, and make sure that actually you bring the people back to trust the political system, because otherwise you have a big problem.
Or at least make people believe or convince them that this is a very important topic to go vote. Because
absolutely.
As you mentioned earlier, there are with the referendum that is going to take place in Italy, that voters are saying that there are so many other problems that we need to decide on. Why should we care about this particular problem and go vote on that?
That's also not a good signal for the government.
Exactly.
If they will listen to it.
I mean, in Italy, for example, for many years we had this referenda, which is the plural of referendum. And, these referenda failed to reach the quorum. You need to have at least 50, for some referenda, you need to have at least 50% plus one of the voters going to the polls to cast their ballot. And they were not doing that. So, you have all this organizational mess, all this time and effort to organize this thing, the cost, which is not insignificant. And in the end, you have no decision because people didn't bother to go to vote. So complete waste of time, complete waste of money. And in the end, whatever issue was on the agenda
is not decided.
It's not decided. And so that's not ideal. That's not ideal. That's why I do believe participation is important. And I think, to go back to one of my pet themes, that having strong parties, strong as organization, it's very important to mobilize the voters. In the sense that if you are a member of a party, you're actively involved in the life of the party, and the party takes a position on a referendum, or whatever the question may be, you have an understanding of what the issue are, or why it is important to take a specific position on that question, and also you have an understanding of how important it is to participate. And so, because of that, the whole system, a little step by step, little by little, I would say almost organically, starts working in a much better way.
And for those strong parties, I think we need discussions, as you
absolutely.
mentioned earlier.
I mean,
those discussions that would be useful for government as well to take a look at what people think.
I mean,
honestly,
if you have strong parties, even if you have, only two strong parties, you don't need to have 27. If you have 27 parties,
it's
a problem.
It raises questions.
Yes.
But also, if you have only two parties, it's
Two
also
parties,
a problem.
not really. I mean,
I think it's like too little. Like,
I mean, look at Britain. I mean,
I'm talking about the United States, where there's like so many different people living together, and they have only two parties to represent them.
Well, the United States, it's in many ways an exceptional kind of place, and what you're saying is partially true and is partially not true, because we know that over time the position of the two existing parties has shifted.
They became similar to each other, or they changed.
They on some policy issue they traded position. I mean, people, if you follow American politics a little bit, and someone were to ask you which party is going to promote the rights of the Afro-American population, you would probably think
Democrats.
Yes, but actually, historically, the party that fought for the rights of the African-American population was the Republican Party with E. Lincoln. And it's only
the Republican Party of the Lincoln days is so different from Trump. Trump's Republican Party.
To the point, I mean, the parties change. I mean, I think you were asking me what I thought of President Trump a while back, and I told you, well, in many ways, he's a truly revolutionary, unconventional kind of person, because he's got nothing in common with the Republican Party. He won the elections, and therefore people think, the Republican Party won the elections, but he has very little in common with the Republican Party. I mean, and I think that given the way this presidency is going, the Republican Party may lose some seats, or more than a few seats, in the next elections, for supporting a president that actually has very little in common with their principle, their values, their history. So, but you take countries like Britain. Britain has been a solid two-party system for basically forever. Before was the Liberal and the Tories, and then with the advent of the Labour Party replaced effectively the Liberal Party, and that became a two-party system. And they've done, I think, a terrific job. So much so, I think, so I don't think you need 27 parties. I mean, 27 parties would be a disaster, but you don't even need 6 or 7. I mean, when you have two parties that do their job properly, that's more than enough, because what you want to do is to have you need to clear position on an issues. And I think, would it be possible to go back to having this kind of well-functioning political parties ever? I don't know. I mean, and that's something that I sometimes worry about, because all the philosophizing and speculating about the possibility of running democratic and non-democratic political systems without political parties, for me, is a great fantasy. I don't think these 30 years of weak parties have done anybody any good, and so in the bottom of my heart, I always hope parties can come back. Whether that's a possibility or not, I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah, that leaves me with a very good thought to continue thinking to myself after our podcast. And I'm really glad that our conversation leaves me at a very helpful note, not a quite cynical that I was before joining our podcast. And I think it's a good time just to wrap up our conversation tonight. And before we do that, we have a small tradition on our podcast. We have this tradition where a guest asks one question that would be posed to the next guest on our podcast.
Okay.
And our previous guest left a question for you.
Okay.
And the question is, can you name 3 values that best describe your personality?
3 values.
Yes. Oh, you can name 4 or 5 if you want.
Is sincerity is a value?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. So sincerity, I tell the truth almost always. I think I'm reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I am resilient.
Oh,
That's a good one.
It's very important. Before we let you go,
You need to come up with the
yeah.
question for our next
Next
guest.
guest.
Oh, I would like to ask him or her what she would like to change in Kazakhstan if she could or he could, and what is it that she will never change about the country?
Wow, that's a great question, and we'll make sure we pass it on to our
Yes.
next guest. Thank you very much,
Pleasure.
Ricardo,
Thank
for
you very
joining
much.
us. Joining
Thank
us
you.
today in the
Pleasure.
studio.